Hey guys, my name is Robin and welcome to my booktube channel. So this is something that I've kind of been toying around with on and off for a long time. I have been on Instagram for about 3 years now, slash had a book blog, paperbacks and planners, and I have been creating content there almost daily for about 3 years. But in about June-ish, I was starting to feel burnt out because while I was still creating daily content, I was no longer engaging in that content, and I was starting to feel a little weird about creating blog content without actively engaging with other book bloggers in the community. And where I spend most of my time is here on YouTube. So I had kind of been toying with the idea about creating a YouTube channel for a while, but I wasn't sure if it was something that I was going to be able to fit into my schedule while working full time and all of that. However, I am now working from home permanently, so I thought maybe that this is something that I could start to fit in. So I'm going to give this a try. I have no idea if this video is ever going to see the light of day or if this is something that I continue with, but I thought that this would be the perfect time of year to start since I, like everyone else, am a huge fan of fall. I thought this would be a really, really good time to dive into the community so that I can partake in all of the fall activities, fall tags, readathons, things like that. Going into Halloween and then Christmas, that's always like my favorite time of year in the community. I just love like the atmosphere of like all of the fall reads and all the fall tags and readathons and all of that. So I decided that this would be a perfect time to give this a try, see if this is something that I want to do and can keep up with. So I decided to start with my summer wrap up. So I'm just going to go through the 10 books that I had on my summer TBR and talk about whether or not I read them and what I rated them. And then at the end, I'm just going to share my 5 favorite books of summer. So without further ado, let's get into the wrap up. So these are in no particular order. I just have my stack over here on the side, and I'm just going to take from the top and slowly move through. So first up, we have Survive the Night by Riley Sager. We're not starting off on a good note because I did not read this. Not only did I order a book of the month copy, but this was a Literally Dead book club pick for I believe the month of August. Um, but and I was really excited about this book, but the closer that it got to the live show date for the Literally Dead book club, the more and more negative reviews I saw rolling in about this book, and just all of the lukewarm like bad reviews really started to get to me, and like I've kind of not lost interest, but like lost excitement for this book. And even though I've loved all of Riley Sager's books, I'm kind of just hesitant to pick this one up now. I do have it on audio, so maybe eventually I will pick it up. Who knows? It is a thriller. Maybe I'll pick it up this fall, but as of right now, I think I'm just gonna put it off to the side and try again later, maybe. Next up is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri, and I did read this one and I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. This is a huge epic fantasy. It is the start of a new series. I believe it's a trilogy, but I'm not positive. What I loved so much about this is Tasha Suri made this, like, even though it's like a big high fantasy, she made this really, really accessible. Like the world building in here was not overwhelming at all, and that's usually where like my holdup is in like big chunky fantasies like this, is I tend to get overwhelmed by like the politics in the world and all of that. But somehow Tasha Suri made this really, really character driven, and because of that, it was really, really easy to read. So I never got hung up on anything. Every time I pick this up, I'd absolutely fly through it. There is a wonderful sapphic romance in here and some really, really great side characters. I also loved that all of the characters in here are really morally gray. So even though you are following like the good guys, they are all kind of out for their own personal agenda. And so even though they're helping each other along, they're doing it for kind of selfish reasons. And I really liked that exploration of like, they're good, but they're not all good, you know, like they're doing it, they're selfish in some ways. They're probably not looking out for everybody's best interest, but more their own best interest. It was a great start to a fantasy series, and I am really excited to see where this goes from here. Next is These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. I also read this. I loved this book. I gave it 4 stars. This is a YA fae fantasy series, and this book is kind of like putting on your favorite sweater. There is not a ton like new and fresh in the story. It is a very like familiar story. You are following this kind of fierce heroine who needs to go out and save her sister. There's kind of a Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella-esque fairy tale plotline. There's a love triangle. It has a lot of tropes, but tropes that I absolutely adore. And Lexi Ryan as an author tends to be very bingeable for me. She's one of those authors where like when I pick up a book of hers, I cannot put them down. You can't see them because they're on top of the shelf, but I actually own a mass majority of Lexi Ryan's backlist, and all of her books are just so consumable. And that was definitely the case with this one. This is her first foray into YA fantasy, and I am really excited to see where she goes from here. I believe that this is going to be a duet, not a trilogy. I could be wrong, but I can't wait to pick up the next book. I'm excited to see where it goes from here. And next is It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. Spoiler alert for the second half of this video. This is one of my favorite books of the entire summer. I adore Tessa Bailey, and this has taken over Fixer Up for my favorite Tessa Bailey book. This was so good. It is a Schitt's Creek inspired rom-com, and the main character is an influencer, and she doesn't have much direction, and her stepfather decides to cut her off and sends her to this tiny little port town in the Pacific Northwest. And there she meets this sailor, and the two of them kind of have this grumpy sunshine enemies to lovers romance, and it's so good. Tessa Bailey's banter is just so good and so funny. This character gave me all of the Alexis vibes from Schitt's Creek. It was perfection. And there's just I don't even know how to explain it. Tessa Bailey's books are somehow that perfect balance between sweet, funny, and super sexy. And like I don't know how she gets all of those things mixed in so perfectly, but this was so good. I loved this. 5 stars. Next up is Archangel's War by Nalini Singh, and I did read this, and in fact I have read this book as well as the next book and I think it's the 14th book, which isn't out yet. So I am completely caught up on this series. This is the 12th book, I believe, in the series. So I'm not going to go into a ton in this particular synopsis, but this is part of the Guild Hunter series, which is a paranormal urban fantasy series. It takes place in New York City, and it takes place in a world that is kind of run by archangels. And with the archangels, there are regular angels and there are vampires. The heroine is part of the Guild Hunters, which is a crew of humans that are tasked with kind of keeping the vampires in line. So when vampires get loose, the hunters go out and capture the vampires and return them to their angels. In the first book, the heroine meets an archangel, the Archangel of New York, and the two of them have to team up to take down another archangel. Each of the books doesn't necessarily follow those two main characters. The main character has a cadre of 7, and some of the books follow those side characters. So you get to see not only this main romance take place throughout a long period of time, but you also get individual books for the side characters as well. This book in particular is kind of the culmination of the entire like overarching plot. So each book has its own plot, but there is kind of like this underlying current, and this is kind of the culmination. I will say this wasn't my favorite. This actually might be my least favorite book in the series. That might be like a really unpopular opinion because this does have extremely high ratings, but this book is really action driven, and I am just not an action plot driven reader. I'm a character driven reader, and so this entire book is all war and battle scenes, and that's just not really my preference. So while this was really interesting and this is a really epic conclusion to that big storyline, it just wasn't my favorite. I will say that the next two, though, were my favorite. So while this one didn't totally work for me, the rest of the series is fantastic. So if you're looking for a really great paranormal series to binge, Guild Hunter series. Next is The Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson. I did read this. I absolutely loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. This is actually my new favorite in the Truly Devious series. So this is, I guess, a companion. So that original trilogy completely wraps up, and this book follows the same characters but in a totally new setting and following a new mystery. So Stevie is invited to the summer camp that is known for an unsolved murder that happened there in like the 60s or 70s, I believe. And so she goes there under the guise of being a camp counselor, but secretly she is trying to solve the murder at the box in the woods. And she invites all of her friends along with her, but while they're there, they realize that the town is kind of keeping some secrets, and a bunch of crazy stuff happens. And part of the reason why I loved this one so much is it follows, or it has a lot of content following my favorite side character from the original trilogy, Nate. So if you are also a Nate lover, there's a lot of Nate content in here. So absolutely loved this one. Next up is As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson. I kind of made a mistake when I put this on my summer TBR. I don't know what I was thinking, but this book isn't out yet in the US. So I don't know why I put this on this list. It is out in the UK. If you are a UK reader, this book is already out, but it is not out in the US. I don't think it comes out until October. So this is getting bumped to my fall TBR. Next is The Lady of Brooksgrave Manor. I am completely blanking on the author, so I will put the picture up here. This is a monster romance. I believe it's also a reverse harem. It's kind of been making its round in the romance community. I originally saw it on Katie Roberts' Instagram story, and ever since then I've been seeing it everywhere. I've heard really, really good things about this, but the more that I was thinking about it, the more I kind of wanted to bump this back to my fall TBR. Just with it being a monster romance, it seems like a really good book to put in between some of the thriller horror books, to be able to still have that spooky vibe, but be able to also mix in some romance. So I have moved this one officially to my fall TBR. And lastly is A Fate of Wrath and Flame, I believe is the title, by K.A. Tucker. K.A. Tucker is the author of the Simple Wild series, which I love. I have not read this. This is, from what I remember, a paranormal romance series. I believe vampires. That's really all I know. I put this on my TBR originally because I was really excited that Kate Tucker was kind of dipping her toe into paranormal. Just had not gotten to this one, not because of this book for any reason, but I read a lot of paranormal in summer and I kind of burnt myself out on paranormal romances. And so I just kind of kept putting this one down because it wasn't a series that I had already started. It wasn't a book for review. It was kind of a new thing. So I just kind of kept pushing it back down. And I really do want to read this one yet. It hasn't been the right time. So we'll see. Maybe soon. Is it for my summer wrap up. I ended up finishing 6 out of the 10, but one of them isn't out yet. So I'm counting that as a success. That isn't too bad. Now I am going to share my 5, I don't know why I keep holding up 2, that's 10, my 5 favorite books of summer. When I said 5 books, what I really meant was 6. I kind of forgot about one of the books, and so I'm gonna throw it in anyways, even though I've said 5 multiple times. But we're gonna start with the one book that isn't technically out yet, and I don't own yet physically, and that is Archangel's Light by Nalini Singh. This is book 14 in the Guild Hunter series, and it is my absolute favorite book in this entire series. This is the long-awaited romance between Ilium and Adon, and when I tell y'all that this is a slow burn romance, I'm talking 14 book slow burn romance, and I was so ready for this book, and I'm so glad that it lived up to my own hype because I was so excited about this romance. It is this really soft and sweet friends to lovers romance. And at the beginning of this book, these two have been lifelong friends. They are both angels, and they kind of had this falling out after one of them went through something really tragic. And in this book, they are tasked with helping rebuild one of the countries. And so they have to kind of come back together, and they're trying to fix their relationship. And as they are exploring their lifelong friendship and what they mean to each other, they realize that they might love each other a little more than as friends. And it was just so good. This book is really emotional, and it really explores grief and PTSD and all of these really heavy topics. And so this is a lot more on the emotional side of a romance than the physical by any means. They don't even kiss until the very end. But I just liked the dialogue and the kind of growth that they had to go through together, where they're facing their own demons together. And so it was really well done. I absolutely adored it. Favorite of the entire series. I know we're only I think there's only slated for one more book, but I'm really hoping Nalini Singh continues on with this world because I love the series so much. Next up is The Love Hypothesis by Ellie Hazelwood, and y'all, I adored this book. This is a grumpy sunshine fake dating romance between a professor and an aspiring PhD student. They are both biology researchers, and they decide to fake date after an accidental kiss in a hallway, and her best friend sees, and so they agree to fake date. The only problem is that he is known by all the PhD students as being the like university jerk, and so together they kind of start forming this unlikely bond, and she starts to see like the softer side of him. And this deals really heavily with women in STEM and like how difficult that can be. Major trigger warnings for sexual harassment. It is on page, so just know that going in. But this romance was just so good. Her book just really spoke to me. I actually am also in medical research. The author is a neurobiologist and she is a professor. So this whole book was just, I don't know, it really hit home for me. There was a lot of things that the side characters and the main character went through that I had also experienced being in a field that is male dominated. So there was a lot of stuff that was covered in here that just really hit hard for me. And I love this book a whole heckin' lot. Next is The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane. I am not 100% on the pronunciation of her last name, so if I am completely butchering that, I apologize. But this is a adult rom-com that follows a tech genius who has kind of had this like weird falling out in his career, and he needs something to prove that he kind of has it all together. So he gets put onto a bachelor type of show. Secretly, he is struggling with a panic disorder as well as OCD. And so he goes onto this show and he kind of breaks down. And in order to make it through, he turns to his producer, and his producer is kind of able to help him open up and loosen up and kind of flourish on the show. And as the two of them start to work together, they start to fall for each other, and it is so sweet. This book deals, like I said, heavily with mental illness. Not only the panic and OCD rep, but the producer has depression, and so the two of them really connect over that and help each other through some really difficult things. And this whole romance was just so good. The fourth book is Dark and Shallow Lies by Ginny Myers Sain. This is actually the book that I forgot about because I read it in September, and for some reason my brain didn't process the fact that September was still summer. So this is a YA paranormal thriller that takes place in the Louisiana Bayou, and it follows a girl who used to live down in Louisiana, but after her mother passed away, she moved with her father to like Iowa or Kansas or something like that. But every summer she goes back down to Louisiana to stay with her grandmother, and she is one of the, I think it's like 10 summer children, and it's all of these kids who were born during that same summer, and they are all a family of psychics. So they all have different psychic powers that are kind of generational, and so the main character doesn't know what her psychic powers are. Her mother was said to be very powerful, her grandmother is a psychic, but she does not yet have any sort of manifested psychic abilities. However, this summer she starts to see visions of one of her best friends who suddenly disappeared earlier that winter. So this year when she goes down to the bayou, she is trying to figure out why she's seeing these visions and figure out what happened to her best friend who is still missing. It is really creepy and really good. The atmosphere of this book, it was just so atmospheric. Like if you are looking for a fall read, this does take place in summer, but it does have a really great fall vibes. However, I will say a major trigger warning for this one. For hurricanes, there is a massive hurricane that hits right at the end of this book. It is in Louisiana, so I just want to give that little caveat here because I know that this could be super triggering to somebody, especially what is happening in the US right now in Louisiana. So I really loved this book. Is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. This is actually only my second TJ Klune book. I know everyone and their mother has read House in the Cerulean Sea. I have not read it yet. I have read Wolfsong, which I absolutely adored, and I have started Ravensong. I just haven't finished it, whatever. But this was so good. I will say that this book is really not as romance heavy as I'd originally thought. I believe the tagline for this was something along the lines of a man dies and falls in love with the ferryman that is supposed to help him cross. That is very true. It is very true. However, this book is far more a story of grief and acceptance than it is about a romance. So this follows a man who is kind of terrible in the beginning, and he dies right away at the beginning of the book, so this isn't a spoiler or anything, but he passes away and he gets taken to this musical tea house, and there he kind of learns what it means to be a good person. So there he has a reaper, there is a ferryman, a ghost, and a ghost dog, and that little found family group becomes very close, and they kind of teach him what the important things in life are and how to be a good person. And the main character goes through a whole lot of growth. Like I said, he is not likable at all at the beginning. And I was like, how am I going to buy into this romance? Because the ferryman is so soft and wonderful. But TJ Klune does an amazing job of developing that growth throughout the story. I do believe that TJ Klune wrote this during his own grieving process. So this is a very emotional and intense story. So huge trigger warnings for grief, loss of a loved one, anxiety, depression, suicide, and animal death. So be careful with this one, but if it is something that you can handle, I highly recommend it. While the topics are really, really heavy, it is still a super sweet story and really uplifting in the end. And if you are an audiobook lover, Kirk Graves also narrates this, just like all of TJ Klune's other books, and it was fantastic. Last but not least, the one I already spoiled is It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. Like I said, I adored this book. It was the perfect summer romance, and I'm so glad that I read it. If you are still looking for like one more summer book to finish off the season with, check this one out. It's fantastic. Okay, so that is it for my summer wrap-up, summer favorites. If you would like, you can subscribe to my channel. I will be posting my fall TBR really soon, so I will catch y'all later. Bye.